Hello po sa inyong lahat. Hello, good morning. Or is it morning? Yes, it's morning there in the Philippines. Magandang umaga po dyan sa Pilipinas. It's 10:20 a.m. there while it's 10:20 p.m. here at Washington, D.C. Magandang araw po sa inyong lahat. Hopefully your day is going well. Um, and despite there's actually here in Washington D.C. it's so hot. Tapos biglang mamaya there's rain everywhere. So hopefully we're all staying
Good morning.
hydrated and we're all staying in a cool area. Like our guest right now is in a very cool area in the Philippines. Nakakaingit po that he is there in a very cool area there in the Philippines. Hopefully hindi po masyadong mainit naman, ano, and all the other places. Anyways, hello po, Ma'am Andre. How are you? Ma'am Andre, you're there. There we go. Hello po. Kumusta po dyan sa Iloilo? Malamig po ba?
Malamig ngayon po, pero sabi nyo nga po, malamig, mainit. Mamayang hapon uulan din po. Ganun po yung klima namin dito sa Iloilo. At malamig kasi sabi nyo nga po yung guest natin nandun ngayon sa pinakamalamig, the summer capital of the Philippines.
Yes.
Siguro mga kakultura, alam nyo kung nasaan yon. So,
di ba nakakainggit? Oo, Ma'am Andre.
I was so intrigued by our guest. That's why naiinggit ako sa kanyang lectures last year. Kaya I told myself dapat ma-invite ko itong
Lecturer,
gentleman na ito, lecturer na ito, kasi maraming mapupulot na magandang lecture or magandang matutunan ng ating mga guro at mga estudyante natin dito sa Pilipinas at sa buong mundo. So, ang ating guest is one of the teaching staff of the University of Hawaii. He was appointed visiting professor of the University of the Philippines Baguio in 2015 and 2018. In 2020, he received the US Fulbright Award. His works are in area of lexicography, translation, creative writing, policy studies, and cultural criticism. He writes in 3 languages. Mga kapwa, mga kakultura, let us welcome to Kolekteratura ng Kapwa o Kultura. Welcome po, Ginoong Aurelio Solver Agcaoili.
Hello po, sir.
Agcaoili. Magandang araw sa inyo mula Baguio po.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning to Alan and to you, Andre. And thank you for inviting me here. I'm so honored. I hope I can pay you back, the two of you, and collect literatura. Yeah, I mean, maybe pay forward, no? Not pay back,
Yes.
pay forward. Yeah.
Pay forward. Inviting your fellow writers po to be part of our community po.
Sa introduction pa lang po, sir, idol na namin kayo. Talaga namang nakakamangha yung mga achievements po ninyo. You know, the fact that you are there in the Philippines right now, you know, you're already giving back to our community. That's only a dream para sa akin. I dream also that someday I could also be back there. Kaya po yung mga research ko, it's all about just Philippines. Kaya dahil gusto kong, I want to give back. But right now, you're already giving back to the community by to our nation by going back there. Opo.
Well, thank you, Sir Alan. I come here very often, like maybe twice a year on the average. And then when I came in 2020, I was locked down for 5 months.
Oh,
yep.
Wow.
So I saw the lockdown in the Philippines right off, firsthand.
Wow.
In prima facie, the Philippine Latin, I saw everything. First 6 months, first 5 months actually, until June, late part of June.
Habang sa akin naman po, sa Guam naman kami na lockdown, and I call it a quarantine dahil nasa beach lang kami araw-araw. Kaya
A quarantine. That's a good
Oo.
one. A quarantine.
A quarantine. Oh,
Yeah.
we're stuck at the beach. We can't wait to hear you, sir. But we wanna also send out greetings, shout out sa mga
Yes po.
admin natin na birthday celebrants. Anyways, Kultura or Kapua, which is now Kapua po, previously Kultura, has celebrated its third year anniversary in creating programs like this. Sir, nasa ang may mga programs po kami sa Kapua na may nasa third season na ng mga programs namin. Kolektratura is on its second season, second year ang Kolektratura, and we have about 5 programs or 5 other programs that we are working on in Kapua po. And so happy third anniversary Kultura Kapua. Yan.
Happy
From
third anniversary po.
oh, 723 po. It's our Kapua or Kulturas actually its anniversary is on July 23. Kaya 2019. And also celebrating birthdays po our admins. Happy birthday po Nanay Ami or Ma'am Ami Sortenia, who is our managing director po ng our manager po, executive manager ng Kapua po ng Kultura. And also Sir Joseph Averilla, who's joined us in many programs already and continues to be active po in our programs here in Kultura or Kapua. Without further ado, sir, kasi we want to really hear your presentation. Talagang this is something that I personally look forward to kasi I can relate to it. Kahit yung background po ninyo, nakaka-relate na ako.
Thank you.
Opo. So, we're really excited po, sir, to hear your presentation. Okay, so we're gonna start. We're gonna start po.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm ready.
Ready? Okay, we're gonna start po. All right.
Good morning, everyone. I'd like to thank first Kolektratura for inviting me to take part in your continuing discussion about the crucial issues about literature, issues about what concerns us as a people in the Philippines and I hope elsewhere. My topic is about this issue of critical reflexivity, as this one impacts Ilokano literature and culture. I am, of course, doing this with Fulbright US and Fulbright Philippines in mind. I was sent to the Philippines this short term for the summer term of St. Louis University to teach in the graduate program of that university's School of Advanced Studies. I'm also doing this in the name of NACIM conferences, as well as, of course, my host university, St. Louis University Baguio. My concerns have something to do with 3 big issues. One is the issue of reflexivity as it concerns about literature and culture. And I am putting in a concept which I call as critical. So I'm not only looking at reflexivity per se, but a reflexivity that is in fact also questioning itself. Now, of course, I'd like to look into this issue with respect to literature and the community, meaning to say literature per se as it concerns the community, and of course, in the end, literature as it concerns human history, this connection between literature and history. And so when I talk about reflexivity, I am referring to this need for us to look into how these things are connected, this issue of reflexivity itself, and the need to be critical about even how this reflexivity concerns us, and also as it connects to our community, and also to literature and to our history. Now, when I say critical reflexivity, or sometimes called critical self-reflexivity, and I coded it as CR, and I refer this to Ilocano literature, I mean these three things. First, it is a critical turning back on Ilocano literature itself. It means simply that this is an act, an intention, and a purposive situation in which Ilocano literature is asking itself what, in fact, is it doing to its history and to its people and to its community, or the community in which we find, for example, this kind of literature itself. Now, on the second one is this literature framed as, framed in the context of critical reflexivity is a process of self-consciousness where an individual subject or group becomes the object of its own scrutiny. So I am borrowing this concept and apply it to Ilocano literature, and I'm talking about this process in which this kind of literature becomes self-conscious, becomes conscious of itself as this becomes therefore the act of the people to write, to inscribe something is not simply a personal act, but it is an act of a people. A writer cannot totally extricate herself or himself, extricate it away from and remove from the community and the history of that people or of the writer herself or himself. Now, the next point is this idea that critical reflexivity as applied to Ilocano literature has this obligation to question itself in a critical way by questioning its very own assumptions of what it is all about. What is it to be the literature of a people is speaking and talking and thinking from, let's say, the language of the community. In this case of Ilocano literature, it's the literature from Ilocano itself, of the Ilocano people. Now, let's go back to the historical account of the Ilocano literature itself. It's an old literature compared to, for example, other forms of writing in the country, in the Philippines. Accounts would tell you of the existence of the Doctrina Christiana written in the Ilocano language, also written in the kind of a writing system the Ilocano people of old called Coritan in the northern part or Corditan in the southern part. They used their own form of writing, so-called Coritan and Corditan, and this was in 1620. Another version was in 1621. So you must see that this literature and also this language, this Ilocano literature and Ilocano language, these are old forms of expressions of the Ilocano people themselves. Accounts of, let's say, the colonizers, where they got into contact with the people they colonized. So I'm talking about generalities here. So when the first colonizer, the Spaniards, came and they got into contact with this colonial subject, they realized that they have this subjects, this colonized people, have high literacy, far higher than the literacy of the colonizers. Now, if you are going to extend this logic of the general contour of the high literacy of the colonized in the country, then we can extend and we can argue that the Ilocano people also were literate people at the time of contact, which we can say that the first contact actually in the Ilocos was in 1572. Now, and we extend the same logic and we say that even in the Ilocos, when the colonizers came, the colonizers therefore were less literate. And so if you connect this idea to the idea in the previous slide about the 1620 account of the Doctrina Christiana, it's the catechetical document, then we see that while the colonizers were destroying this high literacy of the Ilokano people as an extended logic of the general condition of the high literacy of the Filipino people at the time of contact, then we can say that while they were talking about these people, they were in fact, when they were destroying these people, they were in fact also writing about the manner of destroying, so that we can see, for example, in the Doctrina Christiana, some document of the way the Ilocano people wrote and expressed the ideas on the page. Now, so we say and we see that the Ilocano people had their way of making literature as their form of expression even before the time of the colonial contact. Okay, we see this very clearly in the Ilocano Doctrina Christiana. Now, the question is, what happened? What happened to this high literacy of the colonized people, or peoples, if you want to be using the word more plural, plural form of the people to account the diversity of the colonized peoples at that time when the Spaniards came? Then we say, we need to ask that question, what happened to the high literacy? What happened to it? What happened to also this low literacy of the colonizer? It appears that in the documents, the colonizers really were more literate because they were using this kind of a logic that they were in fact here coming to colonize, to evangelize, to give culture to an uncultured people, to uncivilized people, and to announce to them the gospel that they had during the medieval period. So we must see that this is a gospel of the medieval period as understood and interpreted during that time in your 16th century act of the colonizers, the Spaniards, to announce the good news to other places that were presumed to be not knowing of the Almighty or the divine or the transcendent. So I'm using this question to keep on extending and figuring out what happened. I'm using the term Canuto to account, let's say, every Ilocano in the world. So I'm using that term because it's actually a fun term to say and to call, let's say, one a Canuto. So we ask the question, what has happened? And what is happening? And what's going to happen, Canuto? So it's like your Juan de la Cruz. It is like your Jose. So that's the Ilocano Canuto. Now we are going back to this issue that we see in the title of this presentation, the self-reflexivity issue or issues. Now I'm presenting a premise, and I extend that premise from its general form to its more particular form with respect to Ilocano literature itself. So this thing about good literary work must be having these two characteristics. The characteristic of being dolce and the characteristic of being utile. So dolce and utile. Now I'm gonna extend that and to say that what I expect of Ilocano literature must be one that is pleasant and sweet and therefore entertaining. And the other one is it must be useful and therefore it must have the ability to instruct, to educate, to train the mind in the soul and the spirit of the one consuming that literary work. So it must entertain, even as it must also educate, which means that this dolce and utile must come in hand in hand. There must be dancing twins. Now, let's get into the facts of the case. We ask the difficult question: did Ilokano literature entertain? Does it continue to entertain? Would it continue to entertain? And then we ask a corollary one, going back to that idea that a good literature must be dolce and utile. And so we ask the same question. We extend the same logic and say, did Ilocano literature instruct? Does it continue to instruct? Will it continue to instruct? And then so we asked that final question. If so, when did it entertain? When did it instruct? When did it instruct? Or how did it entertain and how did it instruct? So, and then we keep on. How does it entertain and instruct today? And then we say also, how will it entertain or instruct tomorrow or in the future? So we have to ask this difficult questions based on our premise that a good work, a good literature must be both dolce and utile. Now, here is the fact of your case. There are more than hundreds of Ilocano writers writing in Ilocano, Tagalog, and English. Let's say that hundreds. Now, I'm putting together a good estimate based on those attending writers' workshops, conventions, conferences, and also productive writers, those who keep on writing. I am putting the number at 300, plus or minus. Now, in a recent survey we did with other colleagues, between January and April, based on social media pronouncements, meaning to say this boldness and daring of Ilocano writers to tell exactly about their position on a lot of things during what you would call this crucial moment of the national elections, we came up with this number, 33. So of this, more than 300 productive, continuing, and let's say current writers, there are only 33 that had publicized their position about the political situation and condition of the country between January and April of 2022, 33. Now, we said that the good literature must be one that is able to entertain, but at the same time must be the one that is able to somehow instruct us about life, about our community, about our history, about our society per se, and instruct us with what we call the ideals of the good life in mind, ideals that really are related to freedom, democracy, justice, and fairness. So which means that what I'm talking about is this: if a literary work is only looking at the dolce, then it's only putting together one half of its obligations to people and their society. You have an obligation to instruct, to educate. You have an obligation not to fall flat into what you will call the shenanigans and the deceptions and the lies of people who lie because they can. So we need to go back to this very idea, the core of the topic that I'm presenting today, this idea of critical self-reflexivity. And I'm extending this argument now to what I call the IL writer, or the Ilocano literature writer. The first of this is the idea that the IL writer has an obligation to entertain. If the IL writer cannot entertain its readers, then nobody's going to read the work of the writer. What it means simply is that you have an obligation to please your reader or your readers. However, the IL writer also has an obligation to instruct, to educate, to explain, to expect, to make people aware of what is happening, to their country, to their society, to their culture, to their history, by deploying the resources made possible by the literary. Meaning to say, we cannot separate the entertainment value of the Ilokano literature as produced by the IL writer, and also that value to educate and instruct people, including the readers of a work in question. These are not separable at all. Now, let's go back to the facts. If the literary has an obligation to educate, it is required that the literary must tell the facts. The literary must be a friend of correct history. The literary must not, in fact, an agent to distort the facts. Now, what happens is that the writer too must be able to tell what it was like, what it is like, and what it will be like with respect to history, to society, to the community, and to the events, in fact, that somehow in a way would be gripping this community of which the writer finds himself, and his work also finds itself. Now, meaning to say, if the literary work is just simply a fantastic catalog of an imaginary that has no bearing on the historical and the problems, for example, of freedom, democracy, justice, fairness, and this idea of the good life, what choose is the IL? What choose is Ilocano literature? So we have to ask the difficult question, because if it were simply plain entertainment, then it has no use. There is so much that we need to look into in terms of the function of the good literary, the function of the good cultural material. And this is where we are looking into what this IL, what this Ilocano literature must be doing to instruct people, to tell people what is an authentic history, what is a right history, how to interpret, using, for example, the resources of the literary history in order to make people become aware of what they should become aware of. Now, we talked about this 33 people that were part of what you call a group of people that is consistent with the obligation to make Ilocano literature as both dolce and utile. And so we asked this question, this 33 that we talked about, what are they doing to put together this dolce and utile requirement for a good literary work? Now, I must say that we have a pattern, and one of these would be, they are all post-martial law writers. There are a handful who are writers, but were born prior to martial law, but continue until today. They continue until today to write, and to write in the Ilocano language or from the Ilocano language. Now, most of them are in their 40s. There are a handful of women but the 33 really is male dominated. The group is really male dominated. So, meaning to say, it appears that as in the beginning, Ilocano literature is in fact a male dominated enterprise. There were women writers, but there were only a few women writers. And so this pattern continues until today. Now, we have other patterns. There's 33, they have respect for the historical, not the historically, the regular outlets where you have your work published, but some also do it solo. They have their work published by an independent outlets. These writers do not have padrinos or political backers or clients, meaning to say they don't need politicians or the powerful to support their writing life, to support the publication of their work, or to call attention to the fact that they could be the best Ilocano writer there ever is in the entire world. They don't need that. They really are highly independent Ilocano literature writers. And then also, these are the pattern. Their work tell us that they are aware of structural misarrangement of the country's institutions. Meaning to say, they know that something is wrong in the institutions of the country. Now, we have here in this succeeding slides, 2 slides, some names of these people. And these people have lent their name, and it's available in public documents, that they have stood their ground in telling what they think could be the obligation of their work to be both entertaining and at the same time instructive. I'm going to be reading out some of them: Roy Aragon, Chad Buhay, Neo Valdez, Freddy Masuli, Jomar Alvarez, Shema Venosa, Annalisa Gaspar, Arya Sotelo Tabal, Jobert Pacnes, Derek Marcel Yabes, Raquelito Senal, Rolando Seguro Jr., Naglon Otanes, Nelson Daligon, Mikey Racing, Janlil Lasaga, Virginia Duldulao, Leo Tejano, Daniel Nesperes, Godfrey Dancel, Jake Ilak, Ephraim Domingo, Perlas Takwag, Mark Tabunan, Errol Abro, RJ Henova. Okay, so we'll go to this. So what are they telling? If you look into their work, what are they telling you? So we said in the beginning that there is a pattern, that they know what's happening in the country, that they know what's happening to the Ilocano community, they know what's happening to, let's say, to the Ilocano people. Now, given this, you have only 33 of this, and you have more than 300 Ilocano writers writing from and in Ilocano. Now, you might see that on the slide, I borrowed from the Apollo program when there was a problem with one of the Apollo rocket ships, okay? And then there is this statement about Houston, there is a problem. Houston, there is a problem. I'd like to borrow the same thing. I would say, Ilocano literature, you've got the problem. Now, I'd like to repeat that. Ilocano literature today has a problem. So we tell Ilocano literature and Ilocano writers, you have a problem. You've got a problem. Now, given this situation of what you call self-reflexivity in Ilocano writing, we need to address what this problem is all about. And I am using the Ilocano concept, kulaap. Kulaap is this widespread loss of awareness the loss of what you would call this consciousness about what is right and wrong and just and fair. So it is also, since writing is a public text, is a public act, then we can say from a corollary sense that it becomes, this collapse becomes a widespread erasure of the sense of good and right and just in one's head, and in particular in the head of both the writer and the reader, the consumer, the interpreter of the writing of the writer. Now, we are headed to the conclusion, therefore. We say Ilocano literature is in crisis, and we invoke that Apollo thing, Ilocano literature, you have a problem. Now, you have a problem, Ilocano literature, because you have been able to offer only dolce, but not enough of the utile, as we have seen in the patterns of writings of the people we presented in the previous slide. So part of the conclusion is to argue that either Ilocano literature goes back to its obligation to dolce and utile, or it loses its role as a literature of a people dreaming of freedom, of justice, of fairness, of democracy. And as part of my final word, I'd like to say, Salamat Karajaw, Mahalo Nui Loa, thank you so much.
Hello po. Wow, ang dami po namin natutunan sa sa mga kan po. I've taken a couple of notes also myself. Thank you po, sir, for such a great presentation. And of course, sabi ko nga po sa inyo, malapit sa puso ko because it's Ilocano. It's my L1. It's Tagalog is actually my L3 because L2 is my L2 is English. Pero L1 po is my Ilocano is my L1. Thank you po for the presentation po, sir. And again, I thank you for what you're doing to our nation, for continuously doing your research on not only to our nation, specifically to our Ilocano, the Ilocano language. So maraming salamat po. I myself am writing a children's book. I write children's book po. One of the book that I wrote, Pilyong Balong, is I published it for the sake of storing it in the libraries right now. It's kaya people from University of Washington in Washington State can access it. To Yale University has a copy also of my book, and also I'm working here at the Library of Congress in Washington D.C. to have that one. Sir, you mentioned about the Doctrina Christiana, by the way. The Doctrina Christiana is stored here. The original Doctrina Christiana is stored here at the Library of Congress.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Yeah, we have the only one copy we have got, the 1620, is with the Lopez Museum in Mandaluyong. There's no other copy. I checked also in some libraries in Spain, and it appears that there's only one in the Philippines right now, 1620. And that was the reason why.
So there is a copy in the Philippines, po?
Lopez Museum, yes. But of course, it's locked. It's locked. But but I saw the copy, and then I asked for, let's say, a printout. Because it's locked already. Yeah,
that's something new, because all this time we thought that it's the original one is here in Washington D.C.
You might want to check. You might want to check, Alan, the year. If you have the 1621, that's the reprint. That's the second edition.
Oh,
the 1620 is the really original one.
So 1620, okay.
Yeah. That's so good. The scholar Foronda thought it was 1621, but he checked himself when he realized that it was not really 1621, it's 1620. So his earlier scholarship was a mistake. It's 1620 really, I checked. 1620.
Yes.
Yep.
I'm gonna need to revise some of my lectures because of that. That's very good po. That's a very
It's
good
1620.
information.
It's 1620. Yeah.
1620. Okay.
I have a copy, a print copy of that one.
Yeah. Because also the you mentioned about the Koritan, which is the Ilocano. There's a Ilocano version of the Doctrina Christiana, which is much later on. It was changed by who was that? You still remember our lecture, Ma'am Andre? Yung kwan po,
Prince.
yung nagpalit ng kwan, yung yung nung idinagdag nila yung kwan, yung kudlit. That's also when they added. That's where the Ilocano Doctrina Christiana was. Nung idinagdag din nila yung kudlit.
Yeah, the real syntactic and also morphological problem was we were really part of what you call a tradition of the syllabary. We call that.
Yeah.
And so at a certain point, the syllabary would not work anymore as the language got too evolving. And so they needed what you would call the kudlit would be the stop. What do we stop, for example? Like, let's say now, arak. Arak is an invented word. Well, not exactly invented.
Wine. That's wine.
From that's Sanskrit and Arabic. So, arak is also Ilocano, but then there is a terminal K. So it's not a syllable. A, ra, and then there should be a ka. So what do you do? So what do you do with the last sound that does need a vowel? So that's why there is a need to lead the what we call the diacritical mark. That's how it was. Yeah, so that's how it was. They call it sometimes the abugida. But then the Ilocanos had their own writing, which is not really while related to what we call nowadays alibata, but even the term alibata is a constructed term in around 1930s. Alibata is simply a portmanteau of the alif and the beta of the Greek and the Hebrew.
Yeah, so it's a wrong.
Right.
It's wrong.
Yeah, to keep on talking about alibata, excuse you. You have to really look into the history, right? Of how these concepts and ideas and even terminologies evolve. We have to be honest to people in our scholarship and analysis and assessment. We just cannot simply keep on, let's say, hoisting something and say, this is the fact and this is the truth. That cannot be. We have to have evidence and proof. And there is what we call the history of ideas and terminologies and concepts and words. And we need to be mindful of this in our scholarship. That's why I always say, hey, don't talk to me about alibata. You don't know what the history of that alibata is all about. Stop it. Because I know. I tell that to people. Come on. Yep.
Yeah.
All right.
Very important. That was.
It is. We need evidence.
Baybayin po is actually. Baybayin is my research. It's my that's my thesis research po. Baybayin, the role of a written language in the cultural identity and social psychological well-being of Filipinos. That's my research title po, and I will send you a copy of my research paper po. Yung kan po, by the way, yung sa Doctrina Christiana, the Tagalog version, the Doctrina Christiana Tagalog version is 1593, according to a research that I did po. The original is at 1593, and the Ilocano Doctrina Christiana, from what I've learned last time po, was 1621. But now that you said it's 1620, I will research on that and get the hopefully get a proper source for when that's when that is which one is the real. Because it's important as far as our research are concerned.
Yeah, it's 1620, and I have an evidence. It's Lopez Museum Mataguyo. Yep.
Yeah, that's really good point. It's probably a good thing that we correct that in as far as our history is concerned, because we've only known as 1621. But yeah, the 1593 Doctrina Christiana, that was the Tagalog and the Castilla language side by side is here at the Library of Congress. Kaya it's it's I feel much closer to it. Hopefully I get to see it po because I've contacted their librarian just a couple of days ago. So hopefully I get to see it and take a picture of it on my own with a selfie of it para magamit sa presentation ko. Opo. There's a question. There's a one question here because our topic is about literature. What do you see as the current danger in the Ilocano language or other Philippine language for that matter, for like especially in the age of globalization?
Well, several things. I'd like to look at it from in several ways. And thank you for asking that question. May I know the name of that, Alan, so I could address that person more personally, if you don't mind?
Actually, po, it's anonymous. They sent it to me through
All right.
stuff. Yeah, they sometimes
Okay.
we have teachers that
Yeah,
doesn't
okay.
want to be
All right,
mentioned.
okay. Well, it's okay. Whoever asked that question, I'd like to say thank you first for an answer. There are many reasons, and then, ways by which we can address this issue. The issue of the danger or that kind of thing in which we are going to understand the situation of, let's say, Ilocano writing and other Philippine writings in general. All right, so let's do it this way. Let's do it structurally and address, for example, what is this state-sponsored policy on writing today? Now, as this writing also impacts, let's say, the state-sponsored education of people of the country, 114 million of them at this time, I think.
Mhm.
Okay, what's happening? For example, there is a state-sponsored idea about what we call a national language, and therefore, by extension, a national literature, and therefore, extension, national culture. What does it mean? It means simply that, from a structural sense, there is what you will call a creeping, oftentimes unsuspected, oftentimes even subtly accepted, about what we call as endogenous colonialism. We have allowed a colonizer from within. We thought that we have kicked all the colonizers in this country by kicking all this Spaniards and Japanese and Americans. But what we have at this time is, let me repeat the term, endogenous colonialism. There is an internal colonizer, as this is officiated, officialized, and sponsored by the state itself, the agencies of the state, education, etc., all the cultural agencies. Now, what am I saying? What am I saying is that it appears that what is more important is you do write in English, which of course we need, and
Mhm.
you do write in Tagalog or sometimes called Filipino. Now, let me tell you, if you are an Ilocano writer, I mean, are you really being respected if you are able to write only in Ilocano? I don't know,
Hmm.
but oftentimes no.
That's a
So
good.
what is the Ilocano writer and other Philippine writers doing? They are in fact trying to find a way to be accepted by their writing colleagues writing in Tagalog and in English, because in that way you are measured whether you make sense or you do not. That's
Mhm.
why many Ilocano writers try as much to write in Tagalog and English as well.
Mhm.
Because if no one is gonna be reading them, and only these Ilocano people who do not read anyway,
Yes. Po.
what we call the universal reader of the kind of Ilocano writing
Mhm.
going around, what are we doing? It's a
Yeah.
vicious circle, Alan. It's a
Mhm.
vicious circle that we have to rupture.
You
And if
have
you want
to
to do that,
you have to
yeah,
cater to the audience. You have to have an audience in some way.
exactamente. But then we
Yeah.
have to be mindful of what that kind of an audience is all about, because of that
Yeah.
audience also believes in the viral meme or SMS
Opo.
and is so lazy to, let's
Mhm.
say, read a 15-page short story. Now what's the point,
Mhm.
right? And so that's why I always insist that we have this obligation to also educate ourselves as well as our readers, right?
Yes.
As
Opo. Opo.
writers, as producers of the literary.
That's very important po. Because see, like right now, for example, again, this the second book that I'm writing for a children's book po is I have three languages there, or three languages there. Three language. I have English, I have the Ilokano, and I have the Tagalog, just to make sure that it caters to the right people, but at the same time, introducing our own language, putting our language out there for them to be able to read it. And I think, yes, though it is a responsibility, for example, for I completely agree with what you said a while ago when you said, as far as Ilocano literature, I don't know if I quoted you right here. If it is plainly for entertainment, then it has no use. So for that, I agree that you are supposed to. It has to be didactic at the same time.
At the same
Um,
time, in a
yeah, at
subtle
the same
way.
time, it has to be didactic. It has to teach
Subtle.
something.
Yep.
Yeah. So, and that's exactly what we want. I mean, I am glad, for example, that yun nga, when you brought up the Doctrina Christiana, that the it shows the Ilocano literacy ever since that year, whichever, if it's 1620 or 1621, yung Francisco Lopez version of the Doctrina Christiana po. It shows how literate the Ilocanos were ever since. That's why, that's with the mission of the Castilla, the Gospel Gold and Glory, to propagate their gospel to the people. They targeted. Why do you think they used the Ilocano language? They want to target the literate. Who are the literate? The Ilocano people. That's why they used the Ilocano language, at that time. Not only the Tagalog people, which is, the Juan Plasencia's own Doctrina Christiana in 1593. So they realized that, well, we have another target here, the Ilocano people, because they are literate. So that's a very good point, po, what you made there, saying that, it shows the literacy of the Ilocanos during that time, because that's why the Castilla are targeting them also, for
Yeah,
their
yeah, yeah.
literature.
You're correct, Alan, because let's do it this way. If the measure for the literacy is the colonizer's language, then definitely the local people will not make it, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's the same way today. Like, if you are going to be measuring the literacy of the Filipinos by using, let's say, the metrics of English and Tagalog, and then the Cebuanos really are about 25% of the population of the country, how can they be literate in Tagalog and in English? The L1 is really Cebuano, for example.
Mhm.
So I think that we are approaching the problem of literacy from a wrong foundational issue in measurement of what you know, a foundational issue in epistemology, in human knowledge, in fact, in community knowledge as well. So we are
Yeah.
doing it all wrong in a foundationally philosophical way. Wrong.
Mm.
I call it, Alan, bad epistemology, really a
Yes.
bad one.
Hmm. I completely agree, Paul, because yeah. Um, Another thing that I think is very important if we are going to promote our language is that the well, let me ask this as a question, Paul, because this is actually also my question. Um, this is one of the questions that I kind of edited a little bit from one of the questions that they had. What is the role of the local language in understanding our cultural values?
Okay, it's like this. I can give you the facts first before I answer that question. And it's a beautiful question, may I say that. And I wish I know the name of the one asking, but then I don't have access. So anyway, it's like this. Basing on the ethnologue data of 2005, so I'm referring to the one that I have access to because I can't really afford getting to the ethnologue every year. What the ethnologue was saying is that in the year there was 196 languages of the country. 11
Mhm.
really are not original to the country, but really are foreign languages really productively used economically and so on down the line in the country. 185 were indigenous languages. Now you tell me, okay, how many languages really are being honored and respected in the country at this time? There are only two, English and Tagalog. Now,
Yeah.
back to the question of values. Now, we know that language gives us a window to our own reality. which means that I am learning Tuwali now, which in fact is the language of the Ifugao people that I'm doing field work with. I'm
Mhm.
learning Tuwali now. And so the Ifugao people would only understand themselves in the Tuwali language and not what you will call any other languages, because number one, that's the first sound that they heard. Once you are born and you know the first sound, we know that language is not the one that we see on the page in books, but it is the system of sounds that we hear
Mhm.
when we begin to be aware of ourselves, other people, and our world.
Mhm.
Now, what does it mean with respect to understanding our cultural values? The question this is this one: whose cultural value are they talking about? Is it the state-sponsored cultural value, or is it the cultural value of the very community in which we look at the person trying to scrutinize herself or himself about his own human values? So
That
we
is
have to be careful. We have to be careful that cultural values are never a priori. They are never a historical. They are never a political. They are embedded within what you call the everyday of a person, in that person's sense of herself, other people, and her community.
yeah, could be subjective,
So
ano po.
it
Yeah.
could subjective, but it's
Yeah.
objective too, Alan,
Yeah.
because the
Yeah.
community is in fact providing context to that subjectivity. So it's not
Mhm.
relative in the way that there is no limit to this relativity issue. There
Mhm.
is a ground, Alan. It's the community.
True.
The community is
True.
objective. We can't erase this unless we do, let's say, genocide or culturicide, or
Yeah.
what we are doing at the
All
present is,
the
I call
sides.
this litericide or
Mm.
linguicide. So
Yeah.
unknowingly, we are creating forms of genocide, Alan,
Yeah.
in the way we are doing things right at this time.
Mhm.
When we deny people of their own culture, that's culturicide. When deny people of their own literature, that's litericide. I invented that term, by the way, in my previous talk at the University of Santo Tomas Creative Writing Center. Letter-side, I call it the letter, the genocide by way of the letters, which is in fact literature. So,
Yes.
meaning to say, in our small way, we have become fascists and Hitlers and advocates of Aryanism.
Mhm.
The purging, right?
Yeah.
So we really have to be careful and be critical about what we are doing and the kind of advocacy that we are doing, because it might appear that even in our purest of intention,
Mhm.
and when we don't scrutinize, we don't get to that critical reflexivity thing, we might be the unwilling accomplice to what is happening, Alan.
Mhm.
Right? We are not aware, but yet the results are we really are in fact accomplices,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Really, you really have to be. See, that's why we really need to study like what we are doing. Make sure that we are aware, completely aware of what we are doing, so that you know, instead na maka kung minsan yung mga iba nga like nga po, kung minsan na instead na makatulong, nakakasira pa. Uh,
Correct. Yeah,
so
you're correct, Alan, which means that the local one language, in response in a brief way to the question, is the local language is the precondition to a real understanding of the cultural value.
yes,
There
cultural
is no
value.
other way. They call that it is called this. It's we call that in Latin the conditio sine qua non, meaning to say without that local language, we cannot have a proper understanding of what we talk about as cultural values. Because we
Yes,
need to ask eventually whose cultural value you are talking about,
I like what you
right?
said there. I'm gonna quote you from that one. I love it, po.
Oh yeah, of course.
I
Please
love
do,
yeah.
Alan. Please
I'm
do.
gonna,
Yep.
I'm gonna use that for my other presentations next
Yeah.
time.
Yes, sir.
Because
Yes.
my lectures po are really mainly about the baybayin, our writing systems and our our language. So very important. There's one question po from Ma'am Andre here. As a non-Ilocano speaker, how do you encourage us to appreciate Ilocano literature?
Well, I am responding it in an ideal way, Andre. Okay, Andre. The real way to really appreciate, let's say, the Ilocano literature is really get to learn the Ilocano language. Okay, I am trying to appreciate the Ifugao people by learning their language. So, and
Yes.
I learn more. I mean, I'm talking about ideals here, Andre. Now, the other one, of course, which is in fact is going to be giving so much obligation to the Ilocano writer is to get into the translation. But you know that translation is another act of writing. Not every writer can translate. Meaning to say, when you want to translate, then you have to have, let's say, full knowledge of both languages. There are professional, let's say, translators, but then in the end, how much is a really professional translation costs? So, are you imposing now another obligation to a writer writing in the Ilocano language by somehow, in a
Mhm.
way, let's say, obliging that writer to rewrite in another language? So, we wish that we really have professional translators down the road to say, hey, Alan is a good writer in Ilocano, and Andre is a good writer in Ilongga, and then we are going to be to get their text, the work, and then translate to say English or maybe German or whatever. But we know that we are doing when we ask this question, Andre, we are demanding double duty to, let's say, the indigenous writer,
Hmm.
right?
Yes.
Meaning to say you are demanding that the writer writes in her language, and then
Hmm.
at the same time demand that writer translates her language
Her
into
language. Yeah.
one that the other maybe more readers
Yeah, I can
would
understand.
be able to read, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I call that double duty. What is tough, and not everyone can do that, right?
Yes.
Not
Opo.
everyone can do that. And so Andre, please learn my Ilocano. Okay, there are many Ilonggos down in Idon and in Valencia, for example,
Yeah.
that also speak Ilocano particularly in Valencia city in Bukidnon. Many good Ilonggos and Ilocanos down there. So if you go there, I have done a field work there. Andre, they know your
Yes.
language, even if these are Ilocanos. Okay, maybe we can go there together, including also Alan, and then
Yeah.
what I'm trying to say is that we have these linguistic resources. I call it also a language resources,
Hmm.
who in fact is in fact duty bound to learn from each other by learning each other's languages.
Very important.
I
Yeah.
think we have become so lazy to
Mm-hmm.
even try to understand each other by getting into the language and the world offered by that language of another Filipino.
Mm-hmm.
Now, so I'm telling you my experience. I'm learning Tuali. My Lord, it's so beautiful. And I am seeing the Ifugao world by learning their language.
Yes. A completely
So,
new world. Ano po, if you learn other,
yeah, a
Sir,
language is a world,
it opens up
Andre
a new world.
and Alan. Yep.
Yeah. Mama, go ahead, Ma'am Andre. You have a question?
yes, kasi po, yes, yes po, I appreciate po na sabihin na we will learn Ilocano, we will engross. But, sir, as a literature teacher, syempre po, marami po mga writers na Ilocano writers na wala pong translation. So, anong
Mm.
po mabibigay niyo na suggestion? Do we need to go to Google and translate it using their Google? Or do you want writers to put if they're using Ilocano language so that we can appreciate the writers more? Do you need them to write an English translation? Or what
Yeah,
is
yeah,
your
well,
suggestion for us?
the ideal thing is that writing is a tough call. It's hard enough to demand from, let's say, an indigenous writer. When I say indigenous, I'm referring, for example, to Ilocano, Kutuwali, whatever,
Mhm.
Ilonggo.
Yes po.
I'm using the term indigenous to refer to all these native peoples. Okay, okay. So,
Yes po.
um, why do we demand from any Ilocano writer, Ilonggo writer, a translation of her work? Now, that is supposed to be the duty of the school system, the educational system, to provide a translated material so that in the end, we will be able to teach our people right and clear and well, right? So there's so much money, for example, in the school system. Why do we demand this from a writer when writing in your language is already a tough call? So I get your perspective, Andre, as a teacher, meaning to say, I'm sensing the disappointment and the sense of incapability of maybe trying to make these Ilonggo children understand what these Ilocano writers are talking about when they probably are talking about martial law, okay? And the experiences of martial law. However, I would say that it is really a tough call to already demand a writer to write in her language and to demand that writer again to translate that into, let's say, English. How many Ilocano writers can really manage really a literary English? We know that at least there are two forms of the English language: the colloquial, the conversational, and then the literary. It is a tough call, Andre. So maybe from an educator's perspective, teacher's perspective like yours, we have to demand more from our country, from our depth ed, from our the educational system. Hey, we don't demand from the writers to translate. We demand from ourselves and from our educational system to have these good works translated in the language understood by our students. That we should do. And that's where activism and education and being a teacher would come into what we call a fusion. As teachers, we've got to be educational activists, I think. Demand what is right and just and fair in our classrooms, not for ourselves, but for our students, I think. Right?
Yeah.
Yes po.
So
Yeah.
that in that way, we can
Salamat.
allow, for example, now the Ilonggo writer, okay, we leave the Ilonggo writer alone. Please keep on writing Ilonggo. There will be professional, let's say, translators to do the work of translating it to good English, right? So that the Ilonggo writer can give a focus to this translation from her mind, her imaginative mind into something concrete on the page, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Here's
Let's
a
not burden. Let's not burden our indigenous writers any longer. Let's
Yeah.
burden our country to do the job of translating just good materials, because these materials will become instruments for not only the information of our students, but their transformation as citizens, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. So the transformative
Yes po.
element is important.
Ito po, there's a comment on Ma'am Jody. Sabi niya, learning a local language helps us understand their culture. One way to appreciate Ilocano literature is to make friends with other Ilocanos. Marami na pong Ilocano na nandarayuhan all over the country. I know. But, another thing that's good actually is like, so, um, I guess there's a need for translators also, right? For of other language to another to our main Tagalog language. Whoever, katulad po sa akin with my like again with the books that I'm writing right now, I'm looking for translator and I'm putting it in 3 layers of different languages so that others will understand. But I understand also the kwan po that it's hard to burden the writers of such already because it's hard enough for them to already write a literature. And as far as literature is concerned, naman po, sir, question is because you mentioned Kuritan, or the actual writing system. What would be the role? And this is a question I have in my research thesis. What could be the role of written language to the spoken language in propagating or in uh, yeah, I mean, its role in general terms in the spoken language.
Well, I think I'm hearing several layers of your question, Sir
Opo.
Alan. Number one, are we going to go back to the Kuritan writing system of Panos? There's no need. I mean, we just have to be always simply that this was the way they were writing before. To go back and say, we will write this time around. That's 500 years of loss of the Roman alphabet. We can't go back. It's gonna be so tough. Many things. So we have to accept that that's part of our history. But now, um, our language that has evolved after 500 years has evolved this way in its Roman form. Okay. Second point. When we speak about Ilokano literature, Ilokano as is spoken, Ilokano literature, there are two languages involved coming from the same language. One is the spoken form is really colloquial, conversational, everyday. But
Mhm.
there is a set of language, a form of language that we must see in its elegant form because it must suggest of what we call the nobleness of human thought in the literary. What I'm saying is that there are, in fact, two forms of languages when we spoke about the spoken form and the literary form. What it means is that if the literary form is the same as the spoken without any ground, for example, a dialogue between characters, then what is that kind of an utile that we are leaving behind in the literary work? So the tendency for the oral is if you commit a mistake, you can correct that mistake right off. But we can't do the same thing in the literary, the written. You need something written to correct a written something. And it takes time. So there is spontaneity in the spoken form. There is no spontaneity at all in the written form. There is fossilization, there is fixity on the page, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
So which means we need still to demand from the writer the elegance of thought, which oftentimes is vulgarized by the colloquial form. We don't need to be elegant when you say, "How are you this morning?" when we greet each other in the morning, right? Or we
Mhm.
can just simply say, "What's up, brah?" Right? "What's up, brah?" Okay. So, which means that here we have only one language, but there are two forms,
Mhm.
one conversational, everyday, on the street kind. But the other one that we are seeing wherein it is inviting us to somehow entertain that there is a life of the mind, that there is a place for reflection, that there's a place for us to really see that human experience offer a subtlety and instruct us about the nobility of living the good life without the big lies
Mhm.
and historical distortions and historical revisionism, right?
Yes, Paul.
There you go.
Yeah, there are like many different ideas on the restore here po in the US when they say historical revisionism, it's not really bad. I mean there are historical revisionists here who are actually making a living because of how history was written, and of course history is written by victors. So here in the US, as far as history is concerned, it was the slavery was not taught. So there are many things in history that are not, well, there's no final in history anyways. There's always something that we can find out, especially speaking in a anthropologic or archaeological perspective. There are always things that we can discover that will change history. For example, the Lascaux cave in France, saying in our history books that those are the oldest forms of art that started the oldest civilization in the world. It's kind of it was basically disproven when we uh, realized that there are older caves artworks in Indonesia that dated 400 years beyond or before the Lascaux cave. So civilization could have been, it could have been older there in Southeast Asia compared to civilization in the what they called the cradle of civilization in the Mediterranean. Po.
But
Um,
I would say this way, Alan, Sir Alan. I would distinguish for the sake of scholarship and education. I would say historical revision is okay. But if you are going to imbue historical revision by privileging and entitling only one force that is in fact the source of the errors, which we call now as historical revisionism. I think these are two forms, Sir Alan. To historically revise and to be, in fact, a follower of this ideologically charged historical revisionism. I think that's where the problem comes in. So, in historical revision, it could be ideological charge, and what happens is the errors are being justified for what you would call unjustifiable deeds and acts. People. So, historically revise those errors, that's fine. We need to. There's nothing final, in fact. These are all narrative forms, Sir Alan.
Yeah.
Yep. And of course, but then to say historical revisionism as the seedbed of truth, then probably we need to question that.
Yeah.
Because that's where the powerful really get into the historical narrative and say, hey, this is...
that's a problem. That's a problem.
Exactly.
When the power gets into the history in writing the history, there are a lot of opinions on to what truth is. People have their own truth. Sometimes people say there are two truths. There are other sides of truths, but it's really hard nowadays. But in as far as, for example, with us, because for example, with us, me and Ma'am Andre, and here in Kultura and or Kapua in general, we are actually advocating for the revitalization of the ancient writings. Not that we are hoping that in our time we will be writing in our own writing systems, but hoping that it will help the younger generation be the ones to be able to revitalize the written language that we have in the Philippines. Because even from what I found out, written language plays a vital role in maintaining the language. The written language, for example, is of Hebrew. Of course, it's hard to compare how Ben Yehuda was able to revive the Hebrew, and how because they have a lot of corpuses, they have a lot of written materials to back them up. In as far as the Baybayin writing system, we have Juan de Plasencia's Doctrina Christiana from 1593, and we don't have much. We have the Laguna copper plate and other artifacts that has prior to the Baybayin writing system, pero we don't have much. That's why I think when we create more literatures on as far as our language, when we create more of an identity of our language, then it's better. It is better. Our language has a better chance of surviving that way.
But then I would say, Alan, it's gonna be our languages, not our language. 100.
Languages. Of course.
We have to tell ourselves that we have a duty to not exclude. At the moment I hear, for example, a sense of exclusion, who all we are. I think we talked about our identity, Sir Alan, and that should be an inclusive, engaged sense and definition of what would be the constitutive element of our identity.
Oh yes.
We talk about only this identity from the center of power. That's gonna be wrong.
That
in fact is an act of marginalizing and peripheralizing people, and you are doing that in the name of the state. That is in fact the number one marginalizer and peripheralizer, right?
Definitely. But when I mention identity, and it's not just identity as in for myself, but even myself, I have different identities.
Exactly.
I have my spiritual identity. I have my cultural identity. I have my all kinds of identity. But when I meant by identity as a Filipino people, is that not just by the Tagalogs, but our identity as a nation. Not to be too nationalistic, but rather to show that we are one as a nation, and we have to work one as together in order for us to in this age of globalization to really foster growth, not only economic but even cultural. Because yun nga po, if we are so focused, for example, right now with the culture in the Philippines, is that they are liking more of the Korean culture. They're adopting more of the Korean culture than their Filipino culture, than their own culture as a Filipino. It seems like they're separating themselves, and that's what happened also here in the U.S. When with us here coming from a second generation, it's hard to relate to our parents, coming from a generation of well, growing up here in the U.S. with that U.S. culture.
My
Um,
thing, yeah, my thing, Sir Alan, about this issue of identity is this one. We need to be one as a native from a political sense, but we need to be mindful that we are one and plural at the same time.
oh yeah.
We have to put in the plurality and the diversity that is us. The
Mhm.
problem in the articulation of the identity is that it seems that there's only one monolithic
Oh no, no, no.
written and stone identity. It's not. We
Yeah.
have to always insist that we are one and many at the same time. And in that diversity and manyness, that plurality, we are able to come up with what we call a fountain of a rich experience of the diversity of us. Meaning to say,
Mhm.
we've got to acknowledge that in our bodies, we are many.
Yeah.
In our minds, we are many. In our souls, we are many. And so we must not insist alone on that oneness without that other part, that we are many, that we are plural, that we
Mhm.
are multiple. The language of the state is that we are just simply one.
Oh
We are
yeah.
just
No,
a
no, no.
unity. Excuse you. We are not just simply a unity. We have a unity, but we are many in that unity.
Yeah.
Now,
But yeah. It's
failing to
true.
underscore the diversity and the multiplicity and the plurality, that's not gonna work. That's why,
Mm.
let's say it is possible, Sir Alan and Ma'am Andre, that we are looking for, let's say, spaces to fill out this vacuity that we feel. Why so? Because the state has imposed only one sense of identity,
Oh, I
the
hope not.
identity coming
Mm.
from the center of power, which
Yeah.
in
No.
fact essentially Tagalog.
Yeah.
But
No.
when
No.
we begin to say that, there is the Ilonggo promise of diversity and the plural. There
Mm.
is the Tausug promise of the plural. There is vacuity because the sense of imposition of only one and only one sense of who we are is creating a vacuum, because the reality is that we are not only one and we stop there. We are one and we are many.
Yeah.
And
And
so
that's
the Korean
exactly.
thing, the Korean thing is filling up the vacuum that we have in fact created.
Mhm. Yeah, that's exactly the reason why, Paul, when I'm also lecturing, when I do lecture about the Baybayin writing system, and Mom Andre knows this, right, Mom Andre? When I teach the Baybayin writing system, that I speak of it not as just a Baybayin writing system, as the Tagalog writing system, and that because I also teach the Kulitan of the Kapampangan, and I also teach the Hanunoo script, and I also teach the other script, the Tagbanwa script, because when um, in writing it, in, for example, my thesis, I named it as a Philippine writing systems. And that's a problem right now, actually, in sa pagsusulong po nung pag revitalization of a baybayin, is that there is a problem of regionalism, wherein bakit yung Philippine writing system lang ang nakalagay na dapat protektahan, when in fact there are other writing systems in the Philippines. And that's basically where I stand. We're in making and protecting the writing systems of the Philippines. And that's for me, that's very important. That, like what you said po, at it's our yung kabuuan nating pagkatao. It's not just when you say unity, it's just one. No, because there are a lot. And as far as we have so many languages in the Philippines, that's already well, to show that we are plural, and we have to have that kind of thinking in order for us to grow.
Yeah,
Um,
that's why we have to insist on the plurality because that's
mhm,
our resource. It's a resource of the mind, it's a resource of our spirit as a people, it's a resource of our country. Languages and cultures are resources. They are not liabilities, they are assets.
oh yeah.
And so when we begin to insist, for example, on this plurality, first off the bat,
Mhm,
we are recognizing the many that we are. Second point, there is no region in this country that is not regional. Excuse me.
mhm,
This deployment, for example, of regionalism, I would question that. Metro Manila is a region. So
mhm,
now I'm doing something, Alan and Ma'am Andre. Let's not call this regional languages. These are languages from the regions. Let's not call this regional literatures. These are literatures from the regions because there is no region, there is no place in this country that is not a region. We know that. And
mhm,
so when we are going to be flipping the phraseology, the language, we are getting nearer to be more respectful, be fairer, and more just to each other. We all fight for freedom. Let's flip it.
mhm,
These are languages from our regions. These are our literatures from our regions. These
mhm.
are cultures from our regions. That, to me, is going to insist a new epistemology, a new form of knowledge in our consciousness, in our heads, and among our educatees, our school learners. These are the people who will become our citizens in the end. And so it is important that what you're doing, Alan, is to start educating these young people
Mhm.
because this is, in fact, our definition of what this promise is all about, the
Mhm.
promise of a country to be better for all of us.
Mhm.
So there will be no need now anymore for us to leave the country, right?
Yes, opo.
Yeah. So meaning to say, I mean, a country is always a promise, but the question is, does it keep its promise? If none, then people leave, right? Because the
Yes,
promise simply is the good life. It's in fact the social contract that we talked about in political philosophy or political science.
that is true po. That is true. And it's
yeah,
we have to make it a better place for our
yeah.
younger generation to Juan to decide to stay po in the Philippines. And for me, yun nga, it's kaya po yung from yung pangalan ng kultura, which is the name of our kwan po, of our institution, changed from kultura to kapwa to focus more on our kapwa, to focus more on our kapwa tao, kapwa Pilipino, because we want to focus more on that rather than more of the culture. It's more of the kapwa to embrace the other Filipinos po, and even not just Filipinos, even the other nations for that matter. And then that's why we extend also. We learn in here in Kapua po. We are learning other cultures. Every month we have episodes on learning various cultures of the cultures of the world. Uh, just last month, or yeah, last month, right, Ma'am Andre? What culture did we learn about the Oh, you're muted po. You're muted.
We talk about the living goddess Kumari of Nepal.
Yes, the Nepal culture of the Kumari. So even
Yes po.
that, I think it's very important for us to create a kind of like a more diverse global community po. Uh, and that's what we are embracing here in Kapua. Um,
I get it, Alan. But for example, we know that when we do advocacy and cultural work like this one, we need to be mindful that the words that we deploy have
mhm,
consequences. For
Oh, yeah.
example, I would say, I know what kapwa is all about in Tagalog sense of things.
Mhm.
But if I'm going to invite, for example, the Ilocano sense of things, it's a different story altogether. Because for the Ilocano is kadwa. Kadwa is a co-second. There's a
Mhm.
second person involved, which is not present in the articulation of what the kapwa is, which is the fellow in the Tagalog mind. So which means that in the deployment of the Tagalog kapwa, you might be missing some points. And what, for example, other people beyond the Tagalog would understand the fellow. The Ilocano is very clear. Ka, dua. Dua is two. You are my two.
Yeah.
So, are we missing something? Are missing a lot of this richness that we are because we are entitling and privileging one over the other. I can say this, Sir Alan and Ma'am Andre, because I write in Tagalog. My first novel was in Tagalog. So no one can ever accuse me, and they should start accusing me now of hating Tagalog because I write in Tagalog. And I would say that any Tagalog who is gonna accuse me that I'm anti-Tagalog would have to come forward and tell me straight to my face. No, I understand Tagalog the way probably even better than the ordinary Tagalog person. So I know the ramifications when we deploy and entitle a certain concept coming from a certain language and then losing at the same time the ground on which, let's say, a certain term has been deployed.
So what would be the suggestion for example?
No, so I don't have any clear solution, Sir Alan, at this time. But my really theoretical solution is that when we do advocacy work, we really have to be mindful of this variety that we are, the multiplicity that we are. I think I'm seeing a comment on your screen.
Mhm.
Maybe you might want to read that, Sir Alan and Ma'am
Yeah, yeah. It
Andre.
says there
Yeah.
is a newfound interest around the world in rewriting the history of many nation. These moves could be attributed to political leaders who strongly believe that George Orwell said, "Who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past." Earlier nations were thought to be defined by ethnicity, language, or culture, and or by an idea of nationhood laid out by a constitution to reflect a national consensus. But in recent years, several historians have, I don't know what's next for because it's been cut off.
Mhm.
The message has been too long. But
Yeah. Yeah. Would you like me to comment on that?
yeah, yeah, you can comment on that
Okay.
one.
Okay. It's like this. I mean, I'm gonna be making really a brief comment, but I tend to really dominate the discussion. And I know that Andre is saying, "Hey, time check. It's 11:47." Andre is saying, "Okay." Well, anyway, let me tell you, I wrote this essay that has been translated into Cebuano by a lawyer, and it began from my how do you call this the idea that I really have grown uncomfortable with this deployment of nationalism all the time, without questioning how we have conceptualized and articulated what is it to be a nation and what is it to be a nationalist. Now, let me go back to an anecdote. Quezon, when they were trying to look into whether we are going to have a national language or not, this is 1934, 1935. That was the very time when fascism was on a rampage in Europe, right? So that
Mhm.
fascism, in fact, is articulated as there is only one of everything. There's one hayop, one animal, one halaman, one bulaklak, etc., one everything. And so that, in fact, is a suggestion of the purgation of what constitutes a country in terms of its citizens. And so that's why we eventually came up with 6 million Jews being gas chambered in 1 million non-Jews being gas chambered because we want purity, right? So are this incidental to the case? No, it's not incidental to the case, Sir Alan and Ma'am Andre. It is the case that at that time, Quezon was reading these nations that really he was respecting, like Germany, Spain, England, and France coming up with their own national language. They were so busy coming up with their national language. But when we read Les Miserables by Victor Hugo, we eventually realize that the French language was in fact a dialect of Paris, that because Paris was the seat of the revolution, became the powerful language of the several other languages that we find in France. So are we doing the same thing of purging the diversity of our people in this country? I would say we do. That's why we have to be mindful. We have to. And that, for example, therefore, in addressing this question of Professor Nick All, probably, I think she would be a professor. She knows George Orwell, and I think all these things, okay? Big Brother thing in George Orwell. My thing is, we need to be mindful that the manyness that we are is a serious business. And how to do things together, sir, I do not know. But then we start always with the basic principles, okay? The recognition that we are many, and therefore we cannot come up with 1984 and Animal Farm and Gulag Archipelago and Cancer Ward. We can't afford this because these are all articulations of the gas chamber in many forms, maybe tropic, metaphorical, figurative, whatever. But the thing is, the moment we entertain all this sense of purging, we have only one national language. Excuse you, Ilokano is spoken in Mindanao and the Visayas. What are you talking about? What are the parameters? Because the old definition of what a nation is all about is that one history, one story about people, one language. That definition, Professor Nick, whoever you are, Madam, maybe Nick, maybe a lady or a man, I'm not too sure, but then you have to, I apologize if I cannot figure out, okay? Let's see. That definition, which in fact is rooted in the 17th century mindset, cannot hold any longer. Can we build a country or a nation with what we would call variety of histories and variety of languages and cultures? The answer is yes. Switzerland has 4 languages. In all their public announcements, they are using these 4 languages in all public announcements. And students must be aware of their diversity in Switzerland. Now, are we doing this? My other thing, Sir Alan, is this one. Why is it that the Tagalog child is learning her language and the Ilo child is not learning her language, except for the last 6 years of the MLE? Why? Don't you not call that linguistic injustice? Why? So he is a Tagalog child given the chance to learn her language. Here is a Cebuano child deprived of her language. And you call that democracy and freedom and justice and education? I do not think so. That should not hold water. Right?
Yes, opo. Yeah, I think I mean personally, I still believe that there's still oneness despite the having differences, and that's basically exactly the same thing that we are promoting here in Kapua po. And you know, maybe with I maybe have a different understanding of what for me Kapua would be. It's a lot different than kadwa in Ilocano, because kadwa would, how I would translate kadwa in Tagalog would be kasama, which is would be different than kapwa. Kasama and kapwa would be different. But again, it's kwan we have a lot of space to learn, and it's very important that we are having discussions like this in order for us to kwan to understand the variety of knowledge that we need in order for us to grow. Yes, hold on a second po. Here in another comment. I appreciate this episode because it deepened my understanding and respect to all Ilocano writers. Yes. So kung napapansin po ninyo, if there are struggles in writers in Tagalog, there are also struggles in writings in Ilocano. That's why it's important that for me, it's very important that I also know our Ilocano writers. Kaya I would ask tip from Sir Agcaoili. Do you have any recommendation for a suitable Ilocano literature workshop?
I can do that for you.
There we go. That's perfect. That's
I
perfect.
just did one. I just did
I'm
one in Ifugao 2 days for the
Yes,
Ifugao
that would
writers.
definitely be a conpo. It would be useful for us. It'd be useful for us because right now I'm looking into the translation for my one of my books that I'm writing. So I'm gonna really need your help, po, sir, for that one.
Yeah, I'm
Um,
here. I'm here. I'm here.
there we go. Here's another comment from Enteng Ablado. I agree with Sir Agka. I think that in order for us to be more aware of our kapwa is to be first to break away from our own identity. That is very true. You know, we have to break away from our certain identity. Although, of course, making sense of our own being in individuality is also important in order to see that we are not really on our own. Yes, no man is an island. We have shared experiences with others, and literature coming from the various regions in the country helps us to realize that these uh, shared experiences are also verbalized, articulated by everyone else. The common thing. I agree with that one po kasi yun nga in understanding. Meron tayong interview, Ma'am Andre, recently, who's also a writer. I think it's writer of food, about food. Uh, na they were looking for like certain, in order for them to see the history of the food, they are also learning about the other regions and how the history of their food was created, for them to understand the history of their own food. For example, yung pinakbet, for example, meron silang version ng pinakbet uh, in say
Right.
Iloilo siguro, right? Do you
Ma'am
remember that,
San
Ma'am?
Ma'am Santa Maria.
Yes, Ma'am Santa Maria, wherein they have to explore the other regions' history on food in order for them to further understand their history of their food also. So we have a lot of things to learn from each other, and even not just here in the Philippines, but even throughout the whole world. That's why we need these. We cannot afford to be losing what do you call this, a language, because we have a lot to learn from each other. Um, ito pa po. Continuation po ng ng sinabi niya. The common thing, I guess, is that we are one in a struggle. Yeah, that's perfect flow into what I just said. To free ourselves from chains of fascism, oppression, and suffering, regardless of language. And I keep saying this po, Sir Agcaoili, and I keep saying that the more you know about a group of people, the less discrimination. The less you know about the people, the more discrimination. So it's in order for us to know more about each other, we have to learn about each other. In order for us to have lesser discrimination against each other, we have to know more about each other. Dito nga po sa Facebook, I think I just reshared a post wherein part of Europe, I think, I'm not sure if that's correct. They call it the human library in Denmark. In Denmark, there's a libraries where you can borrow a person instead of a book to listen to their life story for 30 minutes. The goal is to fight prejudice. Each person has a title: unemployed, or refugee, or bipolar, etc. But listening to their story, you realize how much you shouldn't judge a book by its cover. So this innovative, brilliant project is active in 50 countries. So that's that's a very good way to know each other, po.
Can I put a note on a
Yes,
footnote on
po.
what Enteng Ablado said?
Yes, po.
Thank you,
Sige.
Enteng, for that. I agree with you, sir, or maybe madam. Okay, that we need to somehow understand that resistance is important. We just cannot simply accept what has been given us. We have to question the received knowledge, or sometimes, oftentimes, the imposed knowledge. Because
Mhm.
when we go through the educational system, there is already this almost inchoate way of the state imposing its own brand of knowledge upon what we call these young people who eventually become citizens. And so to recognize that we need to be together to collectively fight for what really is pertinent to our this journey to become more human and more humane for each other is something that has to be done in a collective way. We cannot go solo here. We
Mhm.
cannot go wild west. It's impossible. It's a fatigue-ridden task, and before you know it, the one going solo might die soonest. So
Mhm.
what we need to do really, um, Sir Enteng Ablado, is to really be together, hold each other's hands. That, I think, is going to somehow lead us to an understanding of what community is all about.
Yeah, that's very important, Paul. Thank you for giving that footnote.
Mm.
It's very important. Again, we cannot stress enough the our sense of being together with other people. Uh, well, it's very important. There's something that I've learned about the incident in or that what happened with the um, in when they were building the Babylonian the tower po of Babylon of isn't that the Babylonian tower po where the
Mm.
different languages. Um, I've always asked because as a researcher of language, like why did uh, God have to do that? Why did He have to separate like different people by different language? And I've learned, it's very important because for me, it's one way of protecting us from ourselves also.
Right?
And one at the same time, helping us kind of like realize who we are as individuals, and at the same time embrace others no matter the differences.
I
So
agree.
yeah,
Absolutely, I agree.
yeah. So that's something that I've learned about that, and definitely something that I will also use in the book that I'm writing right now. Is there's a reason why those things are there, and we just really have to respect each other, and as far as our differences are, in order for us to well progress as not just as a nation, but in this world.
I agree. I agree. Yes. Hats off.
Yes, po. Thank you, po, sir. Thank you so much for introducing us. Well, not to helping us learn more about the Ilocano literature. I'm
There
really
is
hope.
a comment from
Yeah.
Enteng
Oh,
Ablado.
there's another comment.
Yes,
Exactly, sir. That is beauty of our literature. Our aspirations and humanity are articulated. Collective action is pertinent in achieving our dream of a just society. Very important.
I
No, no,
agree. I
yeah.
agree.
Um, the just society is very important that we understand not only what's just for us, our human rights end when others begin. So we have to we have to understand that not only our rights are important, but even the rights of other people are important. um, there I this is honestly one of the best collector tour experience that we've had.
Yes.
Yeah, because we have a lot of discussions on culture, on literature po, and um, I
Language.
really appreciate language. I really appreciate discussions like this, and like I mentioned to you po, Sir Agcaoili, Ilocano is very close to my heart because it's my L1, and it's always something that I hopefully someday I would be able to write more of our literature, write more corpuses for our own dear Ilocano language, for it to continue on. Because something that I really hope that our children will be able to also use someday.
Right, right. Yeah.
Thank you po, sir. Thank you po, Sir Aurelio
Thank
Agcaoili.
you, Sir
Thank you
Alan,
po.
and
Thank
thank
you,
you,
Any,
Sir.
Andre.
Yes,
any final
Sir
words?
Agcaoili. Yes po, maraming salamat Sir Agcaoili for that wonderful lecture. Marami pong mga guro at mga estudyanteng nanonood ang nakarelate o learning from you po. Maraming salamat. And for those teachers who are waiting for the Kultura Code para po sa event ngayong araw with Sir Aurelio S. Agcaoili, we have KLS2E15.KC652. That's KLS2E15.KC652. So, yun po yung Kultura Code. And next, two weeks from now po, dito pa rin sa Kultura, we will have Dr. Bonifacio Comandante, lecture on Baybayin po. And
Yes,
after
that's an
that
exciting
po,
one.
it's a lecture po, it's a interview po with one of the peddlers of the road po. It's an interview po at this month for Dokyo Komentario, we have the ATAS po. So, looking forward for our guests and our participants po in our live and for those who will participate in the Dokyo Komentaryo, maraming salamat po. Looking forward for you, all of you po mga kapwa ko guro, mga kapwa ko estudyante. We will learn from Kolekteratura and all programs of kapwa po. Maraming salamat at magandang araw po.
Yes,
Thank
it's
you,
gonna
sir.
be Buwan ng Wika special because Buwan ng Wika again right now we're talking about Ilokano. Next week or next coming week po it's gonna be Dr. Bonnie Comandante, who's also close to me. He's part of my research, Doc Bonnie. He's also going to be talking about the Baybayin writing system. So very important po that we learn more about our language. Sir Agcaoili, if we could ask you for your final advice or say final words sa mga aspiring Ilocano literature writers po naman. What would be your
Well,
advice for us?
the only way out to eventually, I'm piggybacking on what you said, Sir Alan, is to keep on writing. I know it's not gonna be an easy task, especially for the young ones. And if we need to be committed to, let's say, the future that we have not seen, the only way out is to keep on writing, even if in the end, every Ilocano writer that I know of is a starving writer like me, Sir Alan. There is no Ilocano writer that I know of that really is serious with her or her craft that has gone past, let's say, starvation. Today, I'm still starving, and you Ilocano writers out there, the younger ones in particular, keep on, but you be ready with the thing that I'm experiencing, starvation. That's all right. We do it for our future. We do it for our Ilocano future and
Comrade.
the Ilocano children out there.
Opo. Opo. Thank you so much po for doing this for us and for doing that po, doing what you're doing. Thank you so much, sir. It's very important. Ano po, again, like what we learned here in Kolekteratura right now to everyone, that we treasure our languages. Ano po, we treasure our languages, and we embrace our various identities, our various cultures in the Philippines. And in doing that, po, let's start with our own. Let's start. Let's start with our own local language, our Ilocano. With me, mahalaga po talaga na we treasure who we are because we know. Alam niyo po, pagdating niyo sa ibang bansa, yun ang hahanap-hanapin niyo. Who we are, who you are. And I could not stress that enough. as somebody who had experienced it also myself, being here in America. Yes, I may wear a suit. I may wear a different clothing po than barong. But in my heart, I'm still Filipino. And the way how I'm treated here in America, I'm still a Filipino. And I hope that we all realize that whatever we are, we cannot change. You can put as much glutathione or in your skin and drink as much glutathione as you want, but you are still a Filipino, and we hope that we embrace our being who we are as Filipinos po, because that's gonna benefit our children in the future. Opo. So without Juan po, round of applause talaga, sir, Agcaoili, for your the inspiration that you've given us in this lecture. Maraming salamat po. Good day po sa inyong lahat dyan. I know tanghali na, nagugutom na po siguro kayo. It's also our dinner here. Dinner. Midnight snack na pala.
Yes po, midnight snack na 12 midnight na po.
Yes. Thank you so much po. Again, maraming salamat. Good night po sa inyong lahat kami from Washington DC. Magandang tanghali po sa inyong lahat dyan sa Pilipinas. Bye-bye po.
Bye-bye. Daghang salamat from Baguio.
Yes.
Maraming salamat from Iloilo.
Yes. Okay, bye-bye. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye po.
Bye.
Bye po. Thank you po.